She never amounted to anything, did she? My brother said it like a punchline, wine glass raised, grinning at the table full of people who had watched me grow up. Everyone laughed. My aunt covered her mouth, but her shoulders were shaking. My father looked down at his plate for exactly 1 second, then back up with a small tired smile that said, "Don't make this a thing." My mother tucked a strand of hair behind her ear and said softly, "Now, honey." Which was not a defense, it was a costume for silence. I didn't say anything. I was sitting at the far end of the Thanksgiving table, the seat closest to the kitchen, the one that always had a wobbly leg. I'd been sitting in that chair since I was 9 years old. Nobody ever fixed it. My name is Nina. I'm 31. I'm the younger sister by 5 years, and for as long as I can remember, that gap has felt less like an age difference and more like a verdict. My brother had the kind of confidence that rooms reorganize themselves around. Big laugh, firm handshake, the type of guy who calls waiters buddy and means it warmly. He was good-looking in a way that made people forgive him for things before he even apologized. I was quieter, smaller in the way I took up space. I used to think that was a flaw. I spent a lot of years trying to fix it. That Thanksgiving, I was sitting at the wobbly-legged chair because I'd driven 4 hours to be there. Because my mother had called twice and said it would mean a lot. Because I still believed, even then, that these dinners could feel like something good if I just showed up with the right attitude. My brother's wife was to his left, laughing along. She'd never been unkind to me directly. She was the kind of person who absorbed the temperature of whatever room she was in. Right now the room thought I was a joke. So she laughed. There was a man sitting at the other end of the table, near my uncle. He was a colleague of my uncle's, someone who'd been invited last minute because his own family was out of town for the holiday. He was wearing a dark navy blazer over a gray button-down, and he had the very still quality of someone who listens more than he speaks. I'd noticed him earlier because he'd asked me a question about the cranberry sauce. Genuinely curious, not conversational filler, and when I answered, he had actually listened to the answer. He wasn't laughing now, he was watching me with the specific attention of someone who was recalculating. I know what it looks like when someone recognizes you before you've introduced yourself. I've seen it a few times in the last 2 years. It's not quite surprise. It's the slight pause of a person who is choosing their next words carefully, because the ones they almost said would have been wrong. My brother kept going. He was warming up, the way he always did when he had an audience that was giving him what he wanted. "I mean, think about it," he said, gesturing with his fork. "Nina's been figuring things out for what, a decade now? At some point you have to wonder." He smiled at me, not cruel exactly, just comfortable. The way you smile at something that's never going to surprise you. The man in the navy blazer set his fork down. It was quiet enough that the sound was distinct. My brother didn't notice, but I did, and one other person did. My uncle, who turned his head slightly and looked at his colleague with the focused expression of a man who had just registered that he might have made an error in seating arrangements. I took a sip of water. I'd learned a long time ago that correcting my family in the moment cost more than it returned. Not because I was afraid of conflict, but because I understood the math. A rebuttal at the dinner table gets filed under defensive. The truth, delivered at the right time, lands differently. I'd been waiting a long time for the right time. Here is what my family knew about me. I had gone to a state school on a partial scholarship. I had worked a string of jobs after graduating, a marketing coordinator position, then a role at a nonprofit, then something vague involving consulting that I never explained in full. My mother told people I was still finding my footing. My brother had once at a Christmas party described me to his friends as the kind of person things just don't quite click for. He'd said it affectionately. That was the part that stayed with me. Here is what my family did not know. I had co-founded a company at 28 with a woman I'd met through the nonprofit. We built a financial literacy platform targeting underserved communities. Practical, unglamorous, necessary. We'd spent the first year working out of her spare bedroom. The second year, we'd been acquired by a mid-sized fintech firm in Austin for a number I was not allowed to disclose publicly. I stayed on as head of product. I signed an NDA so comprehensive that my own mother couldn't have found my name attached to the acquisition if she'd searched for it, which she hadn't. I liked it that way. I'd told myself it was because I valued privacy, and that was true. But I also knew, somewhere underneath the truth, that part of me had wanted to see how long they would keep going without knowing. How deep the habit ran. Pretty deep, it turned out. She's always been more of a wanderer, my mother offered, which was the kindest repackaging of failure she'd ever given me, and she'd given me several. The man in the navy blazer looked at my uncle. My uncle looked back at him. Something passed between them that I wasn't part of yet. My brother raised his glass. To the ones who figured it out, he said, looking around the table. His eyes landed on me for a moment, with something that might have been apology, and might have been punctuation. I never could tell with him. And to the ones still trying. People raised their glasses. I raised mine too. The man in the navy blazer did not. I want to explain something about my mother, because she matters more in this story than my brother does, even though he's the one who said the words. My brother learned how to talk about me from somewhere. He didn't invent it. The language had been in our house since before I was old enough to understand what language does to a person. How it builds the walls of a room you'll spend years trying to find the door out of. She never meant to do it, I think. That's the part I've sat with the longest. Cruelty with intention is one thing. Cruelty as a reflex is something harder to name. When I was 12, I won a regional writing competition. My mother read the piece, smiled, and said it was very imaginative. Then, she asked if I'd finished my math homework. My brother, that same year, made junior varsity basketball. She called both my grandparents. When I was 17, I told her I wanted to study business. She asked if I'd thought about something more practical. I didn't know what she thought business was, if not practical. When I was 26 and working at the nonprofit, she told my aunt that I was doing something with community outreach. In the tone of voice you use when you're protecting someone from embarrassing information. I had stopped trying to correct the narrative when I was about 24. By then, I understood that she wasn't lying about me out of malice. She genuinely didn't know what to do with a daughter who didn't fit the story she'd written before I was born. My brother fit it. He'd always fit it. That wasn't his fault either. But there's a difference between understanding something and being okay with it. And I had learned to hold both at the same time. That Thanksgiving, watching her nod along to my brother's toast, I felt the two things side by side. I understood her. And I was tired. After the main course, people started moving around. My sister-in-law went to help clear plates. My father wandered toward the television. My aunt pulled my mother into the kitchen for something. My brother was standing by the fireplace with a glass of bourbon, telling a story to my cousin about a deal he'd almost closed. The man in the navy blazer came and stood next to me near the window. He didn't open with anything clever, he just said, "You're Nina." "I am," I said. "I'm a colleague of your uncle's. We work together at the firm." He paused. "I think I know who you are." I looked at him. "Do you? You co-founded Meridian Financial, didn't you?" He said it quietly, not to the room, just to me. "Before the acquisition." I was quiet for a moment. "That's not public information," I said. "No," he agreed. "It's not, but I was part of the due diligence team on our end. I saw the founding documents." He looked at me carefully. "I recognized your name when your brother said it. I wasn't sure at first." I turned toward the fireplace. My brother was laughing now, big and easy. "He doesn't know," I said. It wasn't a question. "No," the man said. "He clearly doesn't." I watched my brother finish his story. My cousin laughed and punched him on the shoulder. "Are you going to say something?" I asked. "That's not my place," he said. "But I'll be honest with you. I've been sitting at that table for 2 hours, and I've been trying to figure out whether you were waiting for a moment, or whether you just—" He paused. "Whether you just don't care anymore. I thought about that." "Both," I said, "depending on the day." He nodded like that made complete sense to him. "For what it's worth," he said, "the product roadmap your team built before the acquisition is still the framework we use internally. Your name isn't on it publicly. But the people who were in those meetings know." I didn't say anything for a moment. It's a strange thing, being recognized after years of being invisible. It doesn't feel triumphant, exactly. It feels like stepping into light you didn't know was waiting. "Thank you for telling me that," I said. He nodded and moved back toward the other side of the room. I stood at the window for another minute. Outside, my uncle's neighborhood was quiet. A kid was walking a dog down the block. The street lights had just come on even though it wasn't fully dark yet, that strange in-between light of late November. I made a decision. Not about revenge. I want to be clear about that, because the word is easy to reach for and it's not accurate. What I decided was that I was done managing the narrative for people who had never once tried to get it right. That's different. Revenge is about punishment. What I was about to do was about stopping something, the long, slow habit of shrinking myself to fit inside their version of me. I walked back to the dining room, where my brother had returned to the table for dessert. My mother was passing around the pie. My aunt was talking about her neighbor's new fence. I waited for a pause. "I have something I'd like to share," I said. My brother looked up, mildly curious. My mother said, "Of course, honey." I looked at my uncle first. He met my eyes and gave a very small nod, like he'd been waiting for this without knowing he was waiting for it. "I've been working in fintech for the last 4 years," I said. "I co-founded a company called Meridian Financial. We built a platform to help people without access to traditional banking manage debt and build savings. 2 years ago, we were acquired. I signed an NDA so I couldn't discuss it publicly, but I can confirm to my family that the acquisition was successful." Silence. Complete silence. My brother had a forkful of pie halfway to his mouth. He set it down slowly. My mother's face did something complicated. It moved through at least 4 expressions in a second, and then stopped somewhere between hurt and disbelief. "I don't understand," she said. "Why didn't you tell us?" "I signed legal agreements," I said. "And honestly, nobody asked." That landed. I could see it land in each of them at different speeds. My father, who had been quiet all evening, looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen from him in years. It took me a second to identify it. It was respect. Just straight, plain respect, and it cracked something open in my chest because it had been so long since I'd seen it pointed at me from that direction. My brother put both hands flat on the table. "Meridian Financial," he said slowly. He was a business attorney. He moved in circles where that name would have surfaced. I watched the recognition arrive in his face. That was your company?" "Yes, the platform. The one that partnered with." He stopped. He was doing the math I'd watched the man in the navy blazer do earlier, and it was taking him longer because he hadn't been prepared for it. "Your firm handled 2 contracts with companies in our portfolio in the last 18 months, I said. "You didn't know you were working adjacent to me." The room was very still. My sister-in-law had stopped chewing. My aunt looked at my mother. My mother looked at her hands. "Why didn't you say anything?" my brother asked. His voice was different now. The ease had gone out of it. He sounded like what he actually was at this moment, which was someone who had just understood that the ground was different than it had appeared to be. I looked at him. "You called me someone who things don't click for," I said. "At your Christmas party in 2021. I was standing in the other room. I heard you." He opened his mouth, closed it. "I wasn't angry," I said. "I was just done explaining myself to people who'd already decided." I paused. I figured the work would speak eventually. Tonight seemed like a reasonable eventually. My mother made a sound, not a word. Just a sound, soft and fractured, that came from somewhere real. I turned to her. "Mom," I said, "I'm not telling you this to hurt you. I need you to understand that. But I need you to also understand that every time you described me as someone who hadn't found her footing, I had already found it. I was just standing somewhere you weren't looking." Her eyes were wet. I had not expected that to affect me as much as it did. It always amazes me how you can be furious at someone and still not want to see them cry. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I know you didn't," I said. "But you also didn't ask." My brother was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost all the dinner party warmth. He sounded like himself, the real version, the one underneath the performance. "I owe you an apology," he said. "Yes," I agreed. "You do." "I'm sorry." He said it plainly, without decorating it. I nodded. I wasn't ready to say it was okay, because it wasn't okay yet. But the apology was real, and I received it as real. My uncle excused himself and walked quietly out of the dining room. A few seconds later, I heard his voice in the hallway, low and steady, talking to the man in the navy blazer. I didn't hear what they said. My father reached across the table and put his hand over mine. He still didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Here is the part I've thought about most, in the weeks since that Thanksgiving. It wasn't the moment of revelation that stayed with me. It wasn't the silence when I named the company, or the look on my brother's face, or even my mother's eyes going wet. Those were real and they mattered. But they weren't the thing I kept returning to. It was my mother later, when most people had gone home, and she and I were standing in the kitchen doing dishes because she didn't own a dishwasher, and had always said she saw no reason to change. She handed me a plate to dry. She didn't look at me right away. She said, "I used to worry about you more than your brother, did you know that?" I said, "I didn't." Not because you were failing, she said, because you were so self-contained, you never seemed to need anything from me. And I didn't know what to do with that, she stopped. She turned a glass over in the water. I think I made you smaller in my head because it was easier than admitting I didn't know how to reach you. I dried the plate. I thought about 12-year-old me with the writing competition ribbon, about the math homework question. You could have just asked me about my work, I said. I could have, she said. I should have. We didn't fix everything in that kitchen. That's not how these things work. But something shifted, not dramatically, not permanently, not in the way that story endings often make you believe things can shift. Something small and real moved. That's what I've got. My brother texted me the following week, not about the company, not about the contracts, just, I've been thinking, can we get lunch sometime? I said yes. I don't know what that lunch will look like. I don't know if he'll be defensive or genuine or somewhere in between. I know him well enough to know it'll probably be all three. But I said yes because I'm not interested in permanent estrangement. I'm interested in an honest relationship, even if building one takes longer than a single Thanksgiving dinner. The man in the navy blazer sent me a connection request on LinkedIn the following Monday. His note said, "It was good to meet you properly. Your work deserves to be known." I accepted. I am still sitting in the chair at the far end of the table. Some things don't change. But the chair doesn't feel like a sentence anymore. It feels like a seat, which is what it always was. And the difference between those two things is where I've decided to live now. I spent so many years believing that invisibility was the cost of peace. That if I kept quiet, kept working, kept accumulating the kind of evidence that couldn't be argued with, eventually the room would recalibrate on its own. And maybe it did. Or maybe I finally just said something out loud and that turned out to be the simpler answer all along. I don't know. I'm still figuring that part out. But I'm done apologizing for taking up space while I do.